This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. It's been a full week of hot and heavy basketball being played. Probably the gap is being closed up a little bit as far as teams trying to position themselves before we get a little bit closer to that NBA All-Star break. But with everything going on, I'm sure a lot of people's focus and attention was on this massive upset that took place with the Super Bowl. But listen, while people were disappointed about the results, basketball remains consistent. That's why the game is the game, baby. So let me go and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man. I'm sure he did not have any bets moving towards the way of the Kansas City Chiefs, winning this thing, because he's straight up full-blown Tampa Bay Bucks fan. You know what I mean? Like, if it's not Dolphins, it's Bucks fan. My man, Mr. Warren Shaw, ripping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. What's good, Mr. Shaw? I know you didn't throw no dough on on the Kansas City Chiefs going out there and doing what they were supposed to do.
Way to mislead our audience there. I watch the Super Bowl like everybody else. I could care less who wins, so not a Bucks fan.
You didn't
not
have a
Chiefs
vested
fan.
interest in it whatsoever, man. Like,
just
you're just
hey,
not fully vested in the TB12 mantra and stuff, right?
no, can't say that. So I like a lot of people, I guess maybe rooting against the greatest of all time and Tom Brady, but shouts to him for getting it done. Championship number 7 is pretty amazing. And it was pretty funny to watch on Twitter all the comparisons then Brady got to LeBron James, which I was like, LeBron doesn't have even 5 rings, but whatever. So it's just, when you talk about the greatest of all time and greatest of the generations, people want to go there, and hey, it's great. It's great for the, it's great for the NBA Twitter, or just for the Twitterverse, I should say, because everybody was Super Bowl fans over the weekend.
I just don't like when people try to cross section, the greatness of athletes, by trying to put this, he's the greatest athlete of our generation. That doesn't necessarily fly. Like, Tom Brady plays football. Football, yes, it's a physical sport, but you can make the argument that Tom Brady basically drops back, looks for people, throws the football. And then if he can't find, the only time is if he holds the ball too long, somebody's going to come and get him, right? LeBron James plays basketball, but he plays up and down the court constantly for an extended number of minutes, constantly. He will get breathers and spells and stuff like that, but he does have to play physical down low against guys that are bigger and, bigger power forwards, bigger centers, maybe even some bigger small forwards, or whatever the case may be. Has to guard guards and things. So there's so many different dynamics, and I think there's greatness in either one of them. I just hate when we mislead people's perception that based on the championships or, the level of dominance that they have in their individual sports, that it suddenly can be extrapolated to say, oh, this person is the greatest athlete of our generation. You could probably make the argument they're the most successful athlete of our generation. But I don't want to go down that road where, we're marginalizing how people play their respective sports and try to make those comparisons because another sport adds more physicality to it.
Yeah, I agree, man. That's what I'm saying. I think the whole argument is a little, I don't know, it's a little tiresome, but I understand the society that we
I
live
just feel it's
in.
another way for football to try and, big itself up when there's no reason to big yourself up. You're supposed to be the most successful and, most popular sport of all of the major sports. And yet and still, people still have a problem with, what is being produced, on television with the massive amount of money that's invested. Listen, it was a really ugly Super Bowl, right? And while we praise Tom Brady and those boys for it, I just feel like so much of it just makes me, it just reminds me how much I kind of dislike watching NFL football because of so much of the politics involved and how the game is officiated and the way that the game is played. It's just kind of, yeah. I'm hating on it, but I feel like it's been justified now after watching this particular Super Bowl, and not because I would have wanted the Kansas City Chiefs to win, but I just was not impressed by what I saw. So, it is what it is.
Yeah, I agree completely. So, on to the business of what we do here on the Baseline NBA podcast.
we spent a good 4 minutes because Kansas City don't have a basketball team, right? And neither does Tampa Bay. But chances are that probably will never happen anytime soon. All right. Just, just food for thought. All right. So, Shaw, we obviously got a few things that we need to kind of itemize and give perspective and thoughts for. And, as always, man, we appreciate everybody tuning in to us here on the Baseline podcast or the Baseline NBA show, however and wherever you're listening to us. And we always encourage you to, give us thoughts, give us comments. Be sure to get on my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at Game Face Lee, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms, so you know where to find us. You can also catch our previous episodes on www.thebaselinenba.com. So let's get right into it, Shaw. We got some news and notes that's going on right now in the association. And the first one is NBA has decided to open up the voting for All-Star Weekend, which is slated to take place on March the 7th. And it's also been, decided that they will play the All-Star game on March the 7th. What are your thoughts about, the NBA's decision to, forge ahead? Obviously, some of the bigger names in the game are not really taking kindly to the idea of playing this under these type of circumstances regarding the pandemic.
I'm with the players that are speaking out and just saying they don't see it, they have no energy, and I think when the rumor first started a week or two ago, it was from the same things like, why? What is this? It's the biggest money grab that there could possibly be for the league, and I get why it has to happen in some aspects, but I just don't agree. And the players who are selected, most of them are probably going to play good soldier, including LeBron, who's probably been the most outspoken about this. But there's going to be some who probably just don't feel like it's the right move to represent, and it's going to be harsh though for some people who's going to be their first time selections. Like they're going to want to play in this regardless, even if it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense or it's just not where their mind is at right now. But I know the NBA, they'll do it as safe as they possibly can, but I just think it's the wrong sentiment given what they went into the season saying that there'd be no reason to have an All-Star game this year.
It's the wrong sentiment, and I think this is somewhat of a miss by the NBA. I think this could have been a great opportunity to kind of hit the reset button on deciding on what direction you want NBA All-Star Weekend to start moving towards post this pandemic. Now, I'm not saying the pandemic is the reason, but what I am saying is that the pandemic gives you a reason, much like it gave you a reason to kind of tinker with some of the ideas on how you wanted to develop a playoff system that is, a little bit more competitive and favorable to what people have been clamoring for in order to boost those postseason ratings. And I don't understand why the NBA would not take the opportunity for such a situation now, since we are still in the midst of this pandemic, to tinker with some things that I think don't necessarily equate to them having to be on the basketball court to play a game, but to incentivize the idea that people should come and celebrate these athletes, these guys who are going to be selected, like, boost and bolster a presentation for these all-stars and stuff like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be about the game being played as much as it is that we are celebrating the fact that these guys have achieved something by becoming all-stars.
I think that's what you just want to celebrate the people. I think you hit the nail on the head, and but to actually physically play the game, and then you're skipping the city that was originally supposed to have it and putting in Atlanta, and just I don't know, just whatever. I get it. There's gonna be television ratings as a result of it. I'm not clear on whether it's going to be a full blown weekend or they'll just be like the game and a couple of the contests. And I don't know, but this is just about trying to get some dollars in the pockets of the league, the players, the owners, et cetera, et cetera. And we'll see what happens in the next month or so on March 7th.
All right, next up on the agenda, Shaw, let's talk about Christian Wood, one of the upcoming and definitely would be an all-star for this upcoming NBA season. He suffered a severe ankle injury a few days ago. It looked far worse than what the situation came out to be, but he's expected to miss extended time. Obviously it's a big blow to the Houston Rockets, but I just think it's a blow, for people who have been following Christian Wood and finally recognizing this kid and this talent, your young son, that you have been staunchly advocating, to keep an eye for.
Yeah, it sucks for Christian, man. He's really, really, he was really having a good season and we'll come back. I mean, he's week to week, I mean, and that's what they say, aren't we all? Everybody's week to week, day to day. But
Mhm.
hopefully he will be able to come back soon. The thing about Houston, though, really to me was the fact that they were playing such great basketball after the fact they got rid of Harden, right? And everyone's making a big deal about the Rockets having at one point having the best defense since the Harden trade. They'd won 4 or 5 in a row, and then hit a rough patch or whatever. I think lost maybe one or two, but starting to gel, right? And as long as this team can stay healthy, they're going to be in the conversation, and he's a major part of that. So hopefully Wood can get back on the floor sooner than later for the Rockets because they need him if they're going to be competitive and fight for a playoff spot in the West.
Yeah, let's kind of make something very clear here. The Houston Rockets are a good basketball team, right? I don't think that they are more talented than some of the other teams that, are obviously at the top of the list in the Western Conference, but you can make an argument that this is a team that has players that could potentially get better through the course of the season. And whether or not that the loss in regards to the injury is going to take away from how far, they move themselves up, like in this case, Christian Wood, as far as, whether or not this is just, fool's gold or sky's the limit for this kid. That to me is probably the bigger point in all of this is that it's missed time in a space where the Houston Rockets are playing some of their best basketball. But I also want to make sure I pass out my perception about, what needed to happen with the Houston Rockets and moving James Harden. This was something that had to be done. I don't think that this was just, confined in some, little bubble of what happened over the course of the last few months. I think that this has been something that's been happening over the last few years. And then I think if you're in an organization, if you are the ownership, you recognize that you can no longer hold a person who clearly just does not seem to be vested in the well-being of this organization. That's not a knock on James Harden because James Harden's going to do James Harden. But if you're the Houston Rockets and you want to actually see a future or a way forward, you need to start worrying about the guys that are committed to the organization now. And so if you see that in John Wall, you see that in Boogie Cousins, then you feel good about that because those are veteran guys that have felt the angst of playing on disappointing teams that actually want to be in a position to make a team better, to help exceed expectations. But you're even more encouraged when you got guys like Christian Wood, who you're taking on a flyer because everyone else has pretty much downed him, has not considered him or recognized what he can give you, and he's giving you this. To me, it sucks that he's injured because I think Houston Rockets fans are now coming to the light instead of seeing all of the glamour and glitz of the years playing under Harden. They're beginning to see what talented upside and work comes into play with a guy like Christian Wood on that roster. And so with this stretch of games that the Houston Rockets are going to encounter without him, I think it's going to be tough. But more than anything, they know that they still have a good team when he comes back.
They do, right? And I think believing in Wall and Oladipo, who we should probably even talk about in the next segment a little bit, if they decide to keep him at some point as well, we'll see what this team is ultimately going to be. There's all kinds of rumors swirling around what they should do. And, everyone thought the Harden trade would signify the end of PJ Tucker being there and potentially even Eric Gordon and guys like that. But for right now, they're riding out. Steven Silas has righted the ship. And a lot of that had to do with Christian Wood. So the sooner he can come back, the better the Rockets' overall chances in the Western Conference will be. So they don't want to have to fight in that, in that play-in tournament. I think that's where they're destined to be regardless. But this is a good competitive basketball team with proud guys, especially when you talk about John Wall, DeMarcus Cousins, Gordon, Tucker, and even Wood, who probably still didn't get the contract that he would have deserved had he started his career or been able to prove what he was doing at the end of last season a little bit sooner. Some GMs just weren't believers, and that's why he ended up in Houston on still a pretty friendly deal. Because I think his next deal after that is going to be pretty massive.
Interesting, Shaw, because like when you look at their schedule over the next few weeks, it's kind of half and half, right? They'll play the Hornets, the Pelicans, the Heat, the Knicks, the Wizards, the Sixers, the Mavericks, the Pacers, the Bulls, the Cavaliers, the Raptors, and then it really gets tough because they'll play the Grizzlies, the Cavs, and then the Brooklyn Nets. But there are stretches in that schedule where they could probably win games not having Christian Wood. Again, it's going to ride on the guys that we're talking about, Wall, Oladipo, and Cousins, to really help elevate them in that sense. But if they can hold their own, even maybe even come out 500 over the next six games that they play, they position themselves well, going towards the end of the month to still be in the thick of things. And to your point, you just want a chance, like you just want an opportunity. You predict them as being, a playing team. And I see that if there are other teams that are still kind of hanging around and struggling as much as they are, they could be positioning themselves quite nicely if and when they do get Christian Wood back. He is going to be that dynamic piece to that team. He will be their X factor coming back, depending on how far up or how far down, the schedule they play towards their schedule. Myers Leonard and Avery Bradley. The Miami Heat's just been struggling all season long, Shaw. And just now finding out that Leonard is out for the year and Bradley is expected to miss another month. I don't know whether or not that does or doesn't help them. Certainly thins out the roster. But I just feel like if you're the Miami Heat and you're Eric Spoelstra, you got more fish to fry than worrying about these two not being in the roster.
Well, with Myers, I mean, good guy. We all know that, but his his place in Miami was always a little bit perplexing, especially this year. But that's why he's on a 2-year deal. The second year not guaranteed because Miami wanted to keep cap flexibility for next season. With the season-ending injury to I believe it was his shoulder. Um, I don't know if he'll be back. I don't know if we'll see him in a Heat uniform, as the Heat will definitely be trying to make a move, even though they won't be able to get Giannis, presumably. They'll still be out in the market looking for a ways to improve their roster, and his money is gonna tie some things up. So I can't see him returning in a Heat uniform. And as for AB, it just hasn't been a great start to the year for him. When he's played, he's been okay, but he just hasn't played very much. And this Heat team, as you alluded, has been ravaged by injuries and COVID and the whole nine. And they just haven't looked like themselves. Nothing like what we saw in the bubble. And maybe they'll start to turn things around, especially knowing that you don't have to worry about Myers for the rest of the year. And then even with Avery Bradley, when he returns, what part in the rotation does he play? I think the more important pieces in making sure Jimmy Butler and guys like that and Tyler Hero are solid and are healthy and are able to contribute on a regular basis. But Leonard and Bradley are kind of auxiliary pieces right now. And hey, it was nice for the Heat to have them, but they're not going to be make or break without them.
It's kind of crazy how last season the top two teams, or arguably the top three teams in the Eastern Conference, now are the ones that are holding up or anchoring the bottom, right? Like between the Toronto Raptors and the Miami Heat. And it's funny because the Toronto Raptors, I think it's just about them getting out of their funk and getting out of their struggles. They've endured some injuries, and maybe you can make the argument that losing Marcus Gasol and Serge Ibaka really, really hurt them. But the Miami Heat, it's hard to really try and point a finger towards that, because then it's now making us have to question whether or not last season was a fluke, right? Like, did they just simply just overachieve? And we can say definitely the injuries are going to play a factor in this, but to say that the New York Knicks and the Cleveland Cavaliers and damn near the Chicago Bulls are a better team right now than the Miami Heat, that's still saying something. And so I don't know if it's a question of whether or not they're going to have to do something. I don't know what you really can do, right? Because you have to believe that these guys are not hungover from not, achieving the goal of trying to beat the Los Angeles Lakers, which they really didn't have much of a chance to. I wanted to believe it somehow, but they're not that good, right? Not yet. But it's not helpful them coming into this season, especially when some other teams are struggling, that they have not been able to take advantage of that and have actually put themselves a little bit further behind than I think where everyone's scheduled to see them by the trade deadline.
Well, I mean, but they have probably been, along with Washington and maybe a couple others, the most ravaged team and had just bad luck, to begin the year. And no, they haven't played well. Duncan Robinson hasn't been the lights out, oh my God, don't let that guy shoot type player that he was in the bubble and everyone was afraid of in the playoffs. And Tyler Hero has had an up and down uneven season to begin the year, coming back off the bench now, where I think he probably is best suited despite all the talent on the roster and him being one of the most talented players on this team. I thought they were just trying to fast track him into that starting lineup, hence why I picked him to be sixth man of the year. And now they've kind of regulated him back to that role in terms of being their sixth man. So there's a lot to figure out in Miami. It's still a long season. We have, what, 3/4 of it left here, and they can turn things around, but it's been disappointing for sure. And they'll be the first persons to tell you that. As you all know, I live in the South Florida area, and anytime I listen to the news or I peek into some of their Zoom conferences here and there, they're still telling you anything anybody will listen about the culture and how they're not playing up to that culture right now. And with Butler back and presumably back and healthy for the remainder of the season, they think they're going to turn things around now and get things back on track to playing Heat basketball.
All right. Well, listen, if you're not even a Heat fan, if you're an Eastern Conference favor, those who favor watching the Eastern Conference, you want the Miami Heat to be relevant, right? Like, and you want there to be relevancy coming out of the Southeast Division, which right now seems to be the only team that's doing that is the Atlanta Hawks. So we'll see how this shakes. But yeah, man, it's been tough sledding for the Miami Heat. So finally, Shaw, last little nugget of news to kind of get into. Guess who's planning to retire or maybe consider retiring?
Do tell.
I'll give you a hint. Is originally from Australia, and one of the few international-based players to have access to a championship ring.
Andrew Bogut already retired, so who are we talking about?
Damn, man, you stole my name. No, it's actually Matthew Dellavedova. He's considering retirement. When was the last time we mentioned Matthew Dellavedova's name, bro? I can't even recall. I think, wasn't LeBron James still partnering with him? Or did he play with Giannis?
Both. So
did it happen in the same year? I wondered. I can't even. I mean, it's funny how his career, like, it's not him riding the coattails. He actually was he was a great role player, right? And he got that, what was it, like a 3-year, $65 million deal or something like that, and just like fell off the face of the earth, bro.
Yeah, unbelievable. Then returned back to Cleveland, so he says you can't go home again. He came home and hasn't really been impactful. But, sometimes it's just time. And, I don't know if it's retirement from the NBA or retirement from basketball altogether, because he can probably still play overseas if he wanted to. But he's had a nice, solid career and, made a name for himself, was a pain in the ass to who needed to be a pain in the ass to, especially defensively. But, if his time is now, then, hey, he's had a good run at it, has a ring and everything like that too. So shout out to Delly if that's what he decides to do.
Well, I hope that if he decides to walk away from playing in the NBA, if there's space for him to coach, hey, have at it. But if there's space for him to coach the national team for Australia, or if there's space for him to go back home and really develop a program that helps to further the agenda of the NBA's globalization, I hope that he's a part of that process. I mean, as much as we rag on some of these international players because they may be taking up space for maybe some of these other collegiate players or guys that are playing in the G League or this, that, and the third, there still had to be something about that person's game that translated well enough for them to be playing in the NBA. And Matthew Dellavedova was kind of one of those guys. I mean, you can make the argument that the Kevin Huerters and the Lauri Markkanens and all of those don't get the kind of looks that they're getting unless the Matthew Dellavedovas have placement in what they give and what they bring to the table for some of these teams in the NBA. You know what I'm saying? Like, listen, Nicholas Batum can probably thank Matthew Dellavedova right now because my man should be exiled from the NBA after he done took that money, you know what I'm saying, from Charlotte. And they give a dime back, and he's suddenly now starting, or he's playing significant minutes for Tyron's Los Angeles Clippers. So there has to be something good that comes from this. And I wish nothing but the best for Matthew Dellavedova. I will say though that he antagonized quite a few guys and stirred up some pots, man, which made it kind of enjoyable to watch because you were just waiting to see who was going to take that tech. If they were going to catch it, if Dellavedova catches an elbow. But Yeah, man. If he's considering retirement, man, hopefully his next steps will be to continue the efforts of moving the agenda for the NBA forward.
Yeah, I like how you said that. And, even one last note, as somebody you kind of mentioned quickly in passing, and something just kind of flew on the wire here. Laurie Markkinen is now going to be out 2 to 4 weeks. So, the interesting season for Laurie continues in Chicago, and he's having a good year when he's playing, but he's continuing to battle the injury bug here and there, and didn't get that deal, that extension, before the year began. And this is part of the reason why Chicago goes like, hey, yeah, you were playing good, but you just can't stay on the floor, bro. So, we'll see what ends up happening with Laurie Markkinen. But yeah, man, 2 to 4 weeks here on Markkinen, going to be out here for Chicago as well.
No, Laurie Markkinen's new nickname is LHM. Laurie, have mercy. That's just everybody on the line outside. So, good stuff, man. All right, so in a few, Sean and I are going to be breaking down a couple of trade and acquisition, a significant trade that's taken place for a team that I don't think we were all expecting to be this good this soon. So was it necessary? Did this move need to be done? We will get into that, and we'll also get into a couple of NBA trade rumors that's been circulating around the pot. So stay with us here on The Baseline.
And now more Straight Talk from Straight Talk. The big wireless companies say they're the only way to get the best coverage.
Because they've got like a gajillion cell towers?
Something like that. But Straight Talk Wireless runs on those same towers, so you get the same great networks for up to 50% less.
I wonder if they're counting that one in Kickapoo, Kansas.
Oh boy. Switch today and get our unlimited plan for just $45 a month with 25 gigs at high speeds and no contract. Straight Talk Wireless, no contract, no compromise.
Savings may vary. See straighttalk.com.
Time to break it down. This is The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA as we continue our thing, doing it well with the breakdown. So Shaw, let's go ahead and let's get right into it, man. I consider this a pretty big trade. Maybe not the significant trade that most people right now in these circles, when you think significant, you're probably thinking NBA All-Star or, franchise player or maybe 2-3-way deal or something like that. But the New York Knicks have decided to acquire Derrick Rose from Detroit in exchange for Dennis Smith Jr. and a future second-round pick. And the reason why I believe that this is a significant move is, number one, this obviously had to be something calculated. There's obviously a belief that Derrick Rose is going to help this basketball team position themselves better to make a move, to move forward, to be involved in this playoff picture. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be stuck on the whole idea is, Tom Tibbs is probably, the one pushing for this, and Leon Rose had no choice but to capitulate and, get his GM on the horn, be like, yo, make this thing happen. I think people who are thinking that way are not understanding or missing the bigger picture here. The New York Knicks are actually making a positive move in the belief that they think that this team is good enough that they can compete to at least position themselves to either play in or be a part of the playoff picture. And the move is not a bad move where they're auctioning the future of the franchise, right? Like, this is a move with a player who can do nothing but help this team be better by having a guy like Derrick Rose on the roster. I'm curious to get where your perspective is from this, Shaw, because I think the sentiment is whenever the Knicks are on the trade wire or are involved in anything regarding a trade, it has to be all bad or has to be all controversial.
Well, excuse me. Sorry. I think before I even answer that is, how do you think this move potentially impacts Emmanuel quickly? And then I think we can start from there.
I don't know if it necessarily impacts him in the way that I think the perception might be. Like, look, this guy he's going to be a star. He's going to be a important piece if the Knicks truly believe in him. I think there needs to be true guidance from the guard position, something of more reliability. And I think it's the inverse effect. Rather than relying on quickly to be your starter, if he's more effective coming off the bench, or if your belief is that you want Quickly to be starting, right? Then you know that you can rely on Derrick Rose being the kind of person coming off the bench. And I think Tibbs also understands that Derrick Rose is more effective when he is limited in stretches. He is not being exposed to and being relied upon. Maybe that might be the caveat. Is it more dependency on Tibbs knowing that he's got a player like Derrick Rose on his roster that takes away from a guy like Quickly, or recognizing that you don't want to push this kid out too far too fast and have nothing to fall on, which is why you get a veteran guy, a capable scorer, and a guy like Derrick Rose.
Okay. Well, again, it just matters, what you think the rotation is ultimately going to be. I have no idea.
But isn't that always the case with the New York Knicks backcourt? Isn't this what we do our dance with them? It's like, what is your backcourt gonna look like? It always seems like their front court, they seem to shore it up, even when they've got like a what do you call that? They got a big old smorgasbord of forwards and swingmen on their roster. And yet they lack enough guards for them to be able to make a decision on who should be starting and who should be benched, right? It's kind of crazy.
I mean, but like to me is, if you have Austin Rivers already, do you need Derrick Rose? So it's like, then can you play both of those guys at the same time? Then are you moving RJ to 3? So I don't know. Like I said, you get somebody who's a winner. You get somebody that Tibbs knows and loves, and he already has Taj Gibson, and that's why all the joke came out there, because it's like, yeah, he's just going to bring back all the old players he knows and who he trusts from those Chicago Bulls days. I'm kind of on the fence with it. I get the move from a veteran and somebody who's quote unquote a winner, although Derrick Rose hasn't won in quite some time. But at the end of the day, I get that aspect of it. But it is perplexing, especially when you think Elfrid Payton is not having a bad season. I mean, he's not the future of the franchise in any way, shape, or form. But you have Quickly as well, and we talked about Austin Rivers. So it's just, how are these guys all going to play? Bullock is playing big minutes for you. Alec Burks is playing big minutes for you as well. It's just, that's what makes the move strange, to say the very least. But we'll see how it works out. And I think from the Detroit side, hey, you get to just kind of give Delon Wright the keys. Killian Hayes, when he comes back, you take a flyer on Dennis Smith Jr. as well. And it makes never mind. I feel like maybe they could have got more from the other teams that were proverbially interested, like the Clippers and some others out there. But this is the route they decided to go. And in New York, we'll see if it makes some sense. But it's I don't know. It's not a home run for me. It's definitely let's wait.
So
and
let's
see.
wait and see. I get that. I respect that. I don't think that that's necessarily a bad way to look at it. I just believe that there still needs to be a level of comfort, right? Let me ask you something. Were they really losing anything by giving up Dennis Smith Jr.?
No, because apparently the Pistons at least tried to get Kevin Knox from them.
Now,
and
you
I
see,
think
that to me, in a way, I don't know if I would scrutinize the Knicks for giving up Kevin Knox if they had to do that. I think that if that's going to help you really alleviate so that you can really evaluate most of your talent instead of leaving wayward guys that that you're not really committed to and will never be committed to, especially if you're not responsible for selecting that person. So like Leon Rose and those guys, they're not the ones who selected them. Then they, and they don't have any belief or faith in him. Put him somewhere where he, can go and do his thing and like really get the players that clearly Tibbs is going to be comfortable helping these young guys, learn how to play the game with, if that's what the intention is, right? But, to your point, okay, you only give Dan Smith. So I think in a way that's a win. That's a win for the Knicks. They're not giving up more than what was necessary.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I'd rather do. I'd rather keep Knox and see where that goes for sure. But it's just I don't know. It's a weird deal that a lot of people are still shrugging their heads and just kind of scratching their heads. Even some all right, well, why? Other than the fact that Tibbs loves
Well,
Derrick Rose.
do you think that there's the possibility that they're going to thin out some of that backcourt, meaning maybe move Elfrid Payton, maybe move Ntilikina, maybe move you know no, I already mentioned Elfrid Payton before, but to your point, I don't think that they're going to move Rivers. Rivers is already kind of, he's already cemented himself that New York Knicks fans, they like seeing him on the court and they're buying into him, right? It's interesting because if they choose to move RJ Barrett to the 3, what are you doing with Obi Toppin, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's playing backup 4 minutes really at this stage, and he's maybe even playing a little bit of 5 here and there. And Nerlens Noel, I think, is out with a little nagging injury, so you can get away with it. But it's the roster is Tibbs is making it work, but it's still not sexy. And I think to your point, as you're alluding to, some other moves may be coming down the pike here with some of these guys who might have been overachieving, and maybe they will be able to capitalize and get a couple of the pieces that can give them an opportunity for a run at the playoffs, but it's just like I said, there's not a clear pathway, I think, based on the roster that's currently here right now, because now with Rose, it's a high usage guy, he's not a high assist guy on top of it too. So how does that mesh with Julius Randle, who's having a career season? How does that impact RJ Barrett, who's having a career season as well too? Obviously only in year 3. So I don't know, bro. Like I said, I don't know. This is a lot of kind of wait and see when it comes to this.
But this should really kind of tell you with the New York Knicks, like what the Knicks roster really looked like coming into this season and what it's looked like over the last few years. It is a hot mess, unfortunately, it has accumulated itself to the point that if you're still trying to clean house, and when I say clean house, I'm not saying get rid of people. What I'm saying is formulate this roster so it does, to your point, look sexy, right? Look like, because right now it's just, to me, it's coaching and coaching up the talent to play hard that I think has gotten them this far this quickly, right? Now you got to organize this. And we saw this a few seasons ago with the Portland Trailblazers. The Portland Trailblazers kept just, rotating players around until they finally settled in on a few guys that they were certain this is the future of where we want to be moving forward. And unfortunately, it meant a guy like Lamarcus Aldridge not being a part of that picture, but they were certainly comfortable with Damian Lillard, and they were going to be comfortable with CJ McCollum. And now, again, we talk about how Yusuf Nurkic is like kind of like the X factor, the outlier, but at least you're seeing the contributions from the other players who they've kind of had to wait and see, going through all of the hot mess of players that have kind of filtered through that roster, that they're solid on the Gary Trents and the Anthony Simons. I think that the Knicks have to start are trending somewhere in that direction. I'm not saying that RJ Barrett. Let
me ask you this question real quick though. Like, let's from the Knicks standpoint. Mm-hmm. Right now, Julius Randle is clearly the lead alpha dog right there. Right. Whether you like that or not, that's the situation.
Right.
With Rose here in the picture now, would you want Rose being your number 2 guy, or do you still think that's RJ Barrett?
I still think it's RJ Barrett.
Would you?
Okay. But here's the caveat. I think it's RJ Barrett, but I think it's based on where the mentality is of Tom Tibbs. So to your point, Knicks fans are looking at this saying, damn, here we go again. This is like 2013 Bulls, right? Or something like that. That's where Tibbs is on this, or what's being looked at with Tibbs. But my point is that if Tibbs has taken a different approach to getting this team to be successful and play successfully, meaning he doesn't lean on Taj Gibson as hard as he probably did when Taj Gibson was playing as a Minnesota Timberwolf. If he realizes that what he's already getting from RJ Barrett is 17 points per game, shooting a lot better than he did his rookie season, this, that, and the third, then he clearly knows that he has to continue to ride that trend. And even if you're getting a guy like Derrick Rose, it's not out of a lack of distrust. It's out of trying to position them with the best possible players to help them win games that they're just not winning right now because they're so close. Like, they're right there. They're in the hunt. Right? So you're going to go ahead and make moves to at least improve the roster to give yourself the best opportunities down the stretch to not lose games that you're capable of winning. But again, I just think of it from the context of Tibbs understands that the future of this team, whether it is with what you're getting from Julius Randle, moving forward, you definitely are getting that from RJ Barrett. You're definitely getting that from Quigley. So getting a guy like Rose, to me, won't hurt if Tibbs doesn't get in his own way.
Okay. Well,
I know I haven't
I'm anxious
convinced
to
you on
see.
that argument.
I'm anxious to see how it plays. Honestly, again, I just, as an analyst, I'm kind of just dumbfounded. I'm like, all right, this is an interesting move, and how do you make it work? And I don't know, things like this. Unfortunately, knock on wood, but some injury probably pops up where like, hey, it's great they got him. Yes, now they have the depth. But if everyone is healthy and everyone's rearing to go, I'm interested to see how these minutes shake out, because Alec Burks is nice for them. Bullock is nice for them. Knox maybe not so much, but Rivers, Barrett, Quickly, Payton, and now Rose. You have to figure out how all those minutes add up. In addition to trying to develop Obi Toppin at the same time, it's a lot for Tibbs to manage.
We'll see. Well, I mean, we'll definitely see. And I know that we spent an exorbitant amount of time talking about it, but I really do think that it warranted that kind of conversation, Chuck, because you highlighted a really good point in respect to where it was that I was coming from. Because again, it's just a different way of thinking about why it might not be as negative as I think people may want to come off thinking, because of the history that Tibbs and Rose has had. And it not really at the fault of their own. This is what happens when one guy relies on that other guy, who is taking them to, I don't want to say the promised land, but has obviously exhibited the trust and level of seeing that success come from what we saw from Derrick Rose as an MVP player, as, pretty much the pillar of the Chicago Bulls post the Jordan era, so to speak, and things of that nature. And what Tibbs was doing as a coach, getting them close so many times, but not being able to get them over the hump. So, I don't want to look at it in the same way as their redemption by trying to do it there with the New York Knicks. But I will think that if they're able to successfully make this team a winning basketball team, get them in the play-in, or get them even in the playoffs this year, I think that the redemption itself is going to be New York Knicks fans finally realizing that, hey, there are guys out there that do want to do good for the organization, for the franchise, and want to see good basketball being played, which is what I think everybody in the New York area would love to see moving forward. All right, y'all. So really quick, let's highlight a couple of trades and rumors that are taking place right now under the campfire, so to speak. Rumors about Lonzo Ball, JJ Redick being shipped out of New Orleans. Are you buying that idea about, whether or not one or both of them are probably going to get moved?
I think Reddick will. They had already a pretty poignant list in terms of wanting to trade him to a Northeast team, so Philly, Boston, or Brooklyn, ironically, which is like Brooklyn needs more offense with JJ Redick. But I don't know if I love the fit for any of those teams, to be honest with you. I know Celtics fans would love to go out and get a shooter and blah, blah, blah. I just don't know how much of a shooter, how much I trust JJ Redick at this stage of his career. But, he holds the weight in that name, and somebody's going to make a move for him, because veteran shooters like that always get moved. Lonzo, I'm not so sure they're going to have the same level of luck, and it would be interesting to see the Clippers make a move if they were after Derrick Rose. Ball probably fits a little bit better for them, giving them a true ball distributor at that point guard position, and a guy who could still, at least in theory, try to defend. So I think Ball is probably the least likely to go, with Reddick potentially going somewhere, but I don't like those three teams that he's been mentioned to thus far.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of whatevs if either or both get moved. I certainly don't want to see JJ Redick with a Celtic. No disrespect to JJ Redick, he's a great guy. Has a great show that he does, great podcast. But his game does not translate to what Celtics fans need in order for them to be competing right now in the Eastern Conference. Just doesn't. If you want to do it to cock block another team, fine, whatever. If you got the space, it ain't like our roster after a seventh man is so deep that having him is like so much of a hindrance. But I'm just saying, what do you do with this guy, because he's going to be limited? And I think the bigger point with the Celtics is not so much the offense, if it's going to be what it is, because they still just don't address what's necessary from a matchup perspective. It's going to be their defense. Their defense is just going to have to be so much better, because again, they don't seem to directly address and elevate the position from an offensive perspective to give confidence, right? So to me, that's just
Let
what's
me
going to go
let
ahead.
me interrupt real quick, and just because I know we got to run through a couple, but JJ Redick in Golden State, yeah or nay?
I'd like that. I can definitely
Yeah.
see that, right? Like that's re-improving that death by depth lineup that I think that you're going to still be desperate for, regardless of whether or not they get Klay Thompson. So if you're the Golden State Warriors, you could pony up the money for a guy like JJ Redick to do what this team is naturally good at doing, which is shooting the basketball.
Yeah, I like that as a backup guy coming off the bench for them for sure. I think even with Oubre coming around slightly, Reddick would be a nice get for Golden State if they could find a way to make that happen.
Yeah. All right. So out in Orlando, I'm going to skip down to the Magic, because this is a team that started out to get hot, right? Like one of the first 5 games, 6 games, right? We're top team and now they are 9-15. So now they have basically fell into like the what is it, the 12th, 13th seed in the conference. Evan Fournier, Aaron Gordon. We've talked about this. The fact that Fournier's name is now being mullied around, where my thought process is about that. But who do you see being moved first between those two?
I think only because of the shooting, it's Fournier. Gordon's was doing a nice job before he went down with an injury. Terrible injury. I guess he suffered at the hands of Kyle Lowry. Those two have some major beef. Go on YouTube and check that out. But Gordon was playing the point forward position for the Magic with Cole Anthony not quite up to the task, and now he's out. So people just seem to like shooting in the NBA, and I mean it is that. And he can do a little bit of playmaking, a little bit of rebounding. So I think he's someone who's probably going to be more attractive out there. Because Gordon is one of those guys who I feel like teams are like, he was supposed to be X, and now you accept him at what he is, but do you want to pay the price, that it is to get somebody who never really reached their full potential? So if any one of those two guys go, I think it's Fournier, but I don't know. I think Orlando's just kind of shit. They're posturing. I don't think they're going to do anything.
Oh man, you should have said it, man. They're up Shit's Creek. This is a really good show too. Did you see Daniel Levy host Saturday Night Live? It's some good.
No,
it's some good
sure.
shit.
I mean, I've heard really good things about him in that show, though, for sure.
Yeah, man. Anyway, so listen, I would not be opposed to whether or not they decide to move either or both. I do think, to your point, Shaw, that the likelihood is that Fournier will probably get moved because he shoots the basketball probably more and better, or more accurately, I guess. I'm still not completely sold on where Evan Fournier fits right now with what a lot of teams do, because he doesn't do anything bad, but he certainly doesn't do anything great. So I think if what you're asking for is to improve your depth somewhere, then okay, I'm cool with that. But if you're expecting him to come in and elevate, one of your starting roles or starting positions, I'm really on the fence about that. And Aaron Gordon, I guess the upside to him is that, he plays the 4 position, which seems to be a very a finicky role that, guys who play that position can't seem to stay healthy unless your name is LeBron James. So, if you choose to move him, you obviously, think that he is going to be the future of something you're trying to build, maybe a trifecta, or, a secondary player, that accompanies, one of your 1B players or whatever the case may be. But it's interesting because neither one of these two guys have really stepped up, right? Like, they've been so inconsistent. I had high hopes for Gordon. I thought he was really going to improve, especially, after his rookie season. And you just don't, it's interesting. You just don't squander these opportunities. Victor Oladipo squandered the opportunity unfairly. He kind of somewhat got a raw deal. Aaron Gordon squandered his opportunities. The Orlando Magic organization doesn't really do a good job of really harnessing the talent that comes from some of your young players. And if they're not doing that at times, they are basically shitting on them. Right? Like they don't treat them in the way that you would expect them to be treated so that they can stay and build a long lasting future. It's like they're ready to move on and not pay people. And you can't do things like that, man. It just takes away from people being enamored to watch the team play, and it takes away from the players, desire to want to be there and play, man. They're going to have to figure out something. But they cannot continue to play with the roster that they currently have. It's not doing it's not doing Steve Clifford justice because he is a really good coach. But this team is not good enough to be able to compete, especially right now when your whole division is completely down, right? Like, my goodness, the Atlanta Hawks are a 500 team. The Orlando Magic should be taking advantage of what's going on with Miami and the Washington Wizards, and they cannot seem to do that, which is just completely mind-boggling.
You have a lot to say about the Orlando Magic.
I do,
All right.
because I'm tired of their nonsense, man. I really am. Like, they've not done the requisite things to make this team really a better basketball team. Like, to me, it gives Steve Clifford something to work with. It's like the same thing we were saying with Brett Brown before we found out it was the process, right? Like, give him something to work with. If these guys are not going to be good enough, then move them along and bring guys that you can see the success of him coaching that team. He's done it before. There's no reason why he can't do it again, unless you just truly don't believe that he's a good enough coach and that you really believe in the guys that you have on that roster. I've never been sold on most of those guys, and the fact that they're still starting on that team concerns me, because it means like they're just okay with what it is, and it's not even mediocrity. They're just okay with it, and it's just they've taken a step back the last 2 years, Shaw, when they overachieved the first year Steve Clifford has come in there and gotten them to the playoffs. So what are we talking about here with the Orlando Magic? Do something now, because they're not trending upward; they're trending downward.
I don't disagree. I'm just
You're just
the
surprised,
Magic,
like
bro. It's the
I'm
Magic.
going in on it. Okay, all right,
It's just
all right, Shaw.
it's just beating a dead horse, bro.
All right, y'all. So finally, the last one I want to get into, Demar Derozan, Lamarcus Aldridge. Now, we've talked about these two guys a couple of times, and I think part of this was based on the ideas. If you're the San Antonio Spurs, do you hold on and see what you're going to get from these two guys, or do you just really read the writing on the wall and assume one, or if not both of these guys are going to get moved along? You're now hearing that there's some possible rumors about probably both of them, or if not, one of them is getting moved along.
Well, I mean, they've just been rumored for almost 2 years in a row now. And I think in San Antonio, as we alluded to coming into the season, that they were going to reinvent themselves and play a different style. And for the most part, they lived up to it and are still competitive in the West. So I just don't see the Spurs packing it up and saying, all right, we're going to get ahead of this thing and move these guys to make sure we get assets there. They'll just play it out and then see what they can do in the offseason with them. I think there would be suitors for DeRozan specifically. Lamarcus is having a rough go in his new role and battling injuries yet again as well too. As I scour the league, I'm trying to figure out a place for Lamarcus that would make some sense, especially given with how he's playing right now. And I just don't see a buyer out there for him. But DeRozan, there'd be more than a handful of teams looking to get into that conversation. Milwaukee doesn't have enough assets, but they'd love to be able to scrape together something. If it costs them getting a third team involved or whatever like that and adding him to their mix there and having being their starting two guy, I think that would be massive for what they could potentially do. But Lamarcus is a little bit tougher sell for me right now.
Yeah, I'm more interested on where DeRozan might wind up being, because I still think he's got some good basketball left in him. And I'm not saying
he
he's
absolutely
bad,
does.
but he's got to be in the right situation where that basketball translates into something that elevates, a team in a different way, kind of like the reset button when he found himself playing, with the Toronto Raptors paired up with Kyle Lowry. So,
well, maybe your Orlando Magic could make a move for DeMar DeRozan,
well,
to bring some life into that
I
franchise.
do think, well, not just that, but I just think you need a dynamic guard who's not afraid to get in there and elevate the mid-range game. And elevate some of these other guys that they may or may not want to keep to play, and probably light a fire in Vucevic. Maybe part of it is that Vucevic is so good of a player, but he doesn't look like he's someone that is instilling accountability for the rest of the other guys. I don't know if it's being pawned off to other people, because he's sat quietly since he's been traded over to Orlando and has kind of watched all of this happen. And if I were him and I had the opportunities that I think he's had a couple of times, I probably would have walked away unless he wanted to be the leader for the team. And he just doesn't seem to want to be that guy. I think he's completely content with him getting his money, which Orlando clearly wanted to give him for him to be the man there. But there needs to be something else.
I got two more for you though. Dallas or Denver, better fit for DeMar DeRozan?
Ooh, that's a good one. I honestly, Shaw, you're going to think this is crazy. I like him in Denver.
Yeah,
I
well,
like
I
him
don't
in
think you're crazy
Denver.
at all.
I don't know. I don't know if I don't like him in Dallas, but I do think that if you do that, Tim Hardaway Jr. gets compromised. I don't think that, because I think that DeRozan is from an offensive perspective can really help the Dallas Mavericks, but is it really offensive as much as it is that this team just can't do it defensively? And I'm not saying DeRozan is a bad defensive player, but I'm just saying that what more can you actually need offensively that you aren't already getting from the guys that you're getting? Unless you just feel like you got to be just that great offensively, and that Doncic is going to do something for DeRozan that he isn't already capable of doing on his own, that he was doing in San Antonio, so to speak, right? But with Denver, there are some players on that roster with Denver that we've talked about this. You don't buy into the fact that Jamal Murray is like the quote-unquote MVP regular season kind of guy. That's more so Jokic. So that means you got to wait to see Jamal Murray, become Lord Jamal in the playoffs, because you don't know what you're getting from him in the course of the regular season. I think if you're DeMar DeRozan, that's where you shine, right? Like, you can help solidify the Denver Nuggets to not struggle as much as they're struggling, to be where they need to be. And that he cannot have that burden of being the guy coming into the playoffs because he's got all of these other playmakers that he hasn't seen since the first iteration of him being with KC and Lowry and Serge Ibaka back then when he was playing as a Toronto Raptor.
Yeah, I like that too. I mean, I think, you do that for Gary Harris and Dozier and maybe some other things as well too. Gary Harris is probably like Spursian to the utmost pop degree, and a reclamation project that they'd love to maybe take on there with Gary Harris ultimately. And yeah, I mean, Denver isn't a great defensive team right now either. They're really porous, but hell, kill it with fire. That's what we've been talking about. I want to touch on two more guys really quickly here. Thaddeus Young and Nemanja Bjelica. You talk about, we were talking about Philadelphia earlier. They need power forward. That's why I don't think the Redick thing makes a whole lot of sense for them. They need a starting caliber, or at least a quality backup power forward for them. And I think Thaddeus Young, playing pretty good basketball in Chicago right now, or Bjelica, would be great fits. Bjelica specifically because he still brings the spacing with the shooting. Mike Scott's just not cutting it coming off the bench for them there. So love to see Thaddeus or Bjelica, in Philadelphia or some other places that could use some power forwards.
I totally agree with you. If they were to make that trade to move Scott, it would be nice if maybe they do a 3-way deal and send Scott back to Atlanta. I think his best days were when he was playing as an Atlanta Hawk, or the intermittent, opportunities that he played as 76er. But I would love to see him back there. But Bjelica, as far as I'm concerned, he would be comparable. Where the market is right now, he would be needed, but he would certainly be comparable. And if it translates that he is, he cements himself, if a move like that were to be made, then it resets the market a little bit, because he's somebody I think we saw from, his rookie season, man. We said, oh man, he certainly can be a great role player. I mean, remember where there was like, a embarrassment of riches out there in Minnesota. He's basically under Kevin Love and Gorgie Jang and all of those dudes, right? And now it's like he's wayward, but not really at the fault of his own. It's just like he hasn't been able to find placement because he gets moved over to these teams and continues to get marginalized. So going to someplace like New Orleans, I think, will be awesome for him, because it's very readily seen that you're not going to ride on just the shoulders of Zion Williamson. You cannot continue to keep expending the kind of minutes you do without thinking that he's going to injure himself and just be unreliable.
Niccolo Melli's out there. He's basically young Bjelica. No, you're not buying in Melli. That's all right. All right, no worries.
Sorry, I'm not. Anyway, man, awesome show. Great convos. And these are like the kind of trade rumors that we want to keep our eyes out for, because they're tangible, right? They can be done. It's a question of whether or not, they want to be done. And really, again, these could be hits or these could be misses as far as opportunities go for franchises to do what's necessary to either thin out these lineups that you currently see right now in the NBA, or to improve on lineups because they truly believe that adding these players is incentivizing them to position themselves to get into the playoffs.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to have these conversations. And like you said, we're not just, throwing fodder out there and trying to see what sticks. I mean, trying to be intelligent about our conversation with some of these players and where they could potentially go. And, there will be teams out there that come of age, if you will, and say, you know what, we want that guy. We want to make a move. And some players we didn't even get a chance to finish our list here too. So we'd love to hear from our fans and listeners as always. Let us know which trade scenario that we threw out there makes some sense to you, which ones didn't, which one would you like to see, and who are the players that you would like to be mentioned in the trade conversations, maybe when we get to the trade deadline, in another couple of weeks here.
Absolutely, man. So once again, we appreciate everybody hopping on board with us this week. Be sure to catch us here, www.thebaselineNBA.com, for all of our shows in the past and the present, man. And we will definitely be here for you guys here for the future. For The Baseline, Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. We do. And we'll catch up with you next time.